This is a video for artists that are interested in fountain pens, looking to buy one, but don't want to spend a lot of money. Here are my recommendations. This one is a pretty generic recommendation. This is a pen that is recommended on lots of people's buy this pen or buy your first pen list. This is a Pilot Metropolitan. What makes it so good? Well, first of all, it's a $30 pen. It's made of brass. It's incredibly solid. The build quality is excellent for the price. And it's an excellent writer. It's incredibly reliable. I know that this pen is going to write, provided it's got ink in it, which cannot be said for even much more expensive pens. The nib is very, very smooth. And I think the ergonomics on this pen are pretty good. It is a heavy pen. If you post it, it becomes a little bit back heavy. But look, these things are subjective. The fact that the pen is heavy, the fact that when it's posted, it is a little bit back heavy doesn't bother me that much. And I've drawn with this pen for fairly long periods of time. For me, it's comfortable. For you, well, look, it really, really depends. I think most people find this pen pretty comfortable. Some people complain about the slick grip section. Again, the back weight. That can be an issue. I think the one main issue that I think kind of bothers everybody is the fact that this pen uses a cartridge, which is fine. A lot of pens use cartridges. But if you don't want to use a cartridge and you want to use a converter, it only fits this really crappy, what's called the Con 40 converter, which has a little tiny ink capacity. And even with this little tiny ink capacity, it's almost impossible to fill it all the way up to the back. If you're going to use it just with cartridges, it's not an issue. But if you want to use bottled ink, which I highly recommend because there's a much broader range of different kinds of inks out there, and it's one of the reasons why you might want to use a fountain pen, is the fact that you've got a whole world of different kinds of inks at your disposal when you do so. This is the only option as far as a converter goes. The other disadvantage is that, look, if you're using black ink, I can't tell how much ink is in here. So quite often I've taken this pen out for a stroll and then realized I've had absolutely no ink in it or it ran out immediately. So look, unless you have extra cartridges with you, which I don't always do, I'm not always that prepared, quite often you'll find yourself out of ink. That's about it. Look, I really recommend this pen. This is, I think, the first pen I owned, so this is kind of considered entry level. I think most people that start in the fountain pen world probably start off with this Pilot Metropolitan. It's a really good starting point. Again, it draws really, really well. This is an extra fine. Keep in mind that the Japanese nibs run a little bit finer than the Western nibs, so a medium Japanese nib might be the equivalent of a fine in a Western brand. What else can I say about this? I don't really use this pen that much anymore, so I still have it. It's really nice. Maybe I'll give it to somebody at some point. But it's definitely a really good starting pen. Pilot Metropolitan. Available in a range of colors also, not just serious black. Okay, the next pen is a TWSBI Eco. This pen requires a little bit more commitment from you, which we'll talk about in a second. Let's talk about the advantages first. Well, first of all, I can see the ink. So one of the first reasons why I fell in love with fountain pens is the fact that they're demonstrators, or quite often that I really enjoy the fact that pens are demonstrators. Let's put it that way. I can see how much ink is in there without having to open the pen. I know exactly when the pen is going to run out, when I need to refill it. And then I've got a number of these pens filled with different colors. I know what kind of ink is in it. I don't have to test it out on a piece of paper. I think for artists, that's a huge advantage. The fact that I can take this pen out and not worry whether it has ink in it or not. It has a built-in filling mechanism. This is a piston filler, so I twist this thing and this little piston goes down and then up and sucks ink into the reservoir. For this price, this is one of the few pens with a built-in filling mechanism. So it's the same price as the Pilot Metropolitan, $30. For that price, usually pens are what are called cartridge or converter, meaning they take a little plastic cartridge or one of these little converters. And usually at that price, the converters aren't all that great. They have limited ink capacity. So the fact that this has a built-in filling mechanism is really, really great. It does have a disadvantage, and any pen with a built-in mechanism, filling mechanism, does have this disadvantage. It can be a little bit of a problem to clean out. Now, most of the time I use the same colored ink, so I don't have to clean this out. All I need to do is maybe flush the pen a couple of times so that there's no caked up ink anywhere. However, if I want to change colors entirely, I'm going to have to open up this pen in the back and clean out the entire piston mechanism, re-grease it, which requires a little tool and probably a tutorial or two to learn how to do. Now, once you know how to do it, it's not an issue. It just, again, takes a little bit of commitment on your part to actually watch the tutorial and figure out how to disassemble the filling mechanism and clean it out. What else? Look, it's an absolutely excellent drawer, writer, whatever you do with it. It's got a German nib. This is made by Jowo. And this brand of nib is featured in pens that are much more expensive. So you'll find high-end boutique pens that have really expensive backs, but they feature the same nib as this one. So look, for the price range, having a German Jowo nib is huge. It writes really, really well. It's a stiff nib like the Pilot Metropolitan, but this one actually gives me a little bit of line variation. And you can do the same thing with Pilot Metropolitan, but I can flip it and it gives me a super thin, extra fine needle point line. Super reliable, cheap enough that I'm not afraid to throw it around. Not that I do, but throw it in my bag with a bunch of other stuff. Not afraid to scratch it. Look, I think that's a requirement for most artists. Having a pen that you don't need to baby, keep in a case, worry if it's going to get lost. My studio's a mess. I've got paint everywhere. Okay, that's not exactly true, but it's not a particularly clean environment. I throw my pens around a little bit. I'm working. I don't want to worry about a pen that is really expensive or that I scratch. So having a good quality pen that's sturdy, reliable, that you can see the ink, that writes every single time, I think is a huge advantage. Okay, so this is a TWSBI Eco. I like most of the TWSBI pens. There's a few I dislike. I have a tutorial on most of the TWSBI pens that I have, actually all of them, excuse me. But out of all the TWSBI pens, this is the second most expensive. It's $30, then they go up to $60, $70. This is still my favorite pen. In fact, look, I think this is just about my favorite pen out of all the pens I own. I have pens that are prettier, nicer, but just for everyday, like workhorse stuff, this is my go-to pen, the TWSBI Eco. Now, this next pen, nope, that's not the pen I wanted. I wanted this pen. So this is a Noodlers Ahab. This, by the way, I just showed you is a Noodlers Conrad, which is a similar pen, which I also like, but we're not going to talk about. This is the Noodlers Ahab. This is probably the second pen that I bought in my fountain pen adventure. What makes it so darn good? Well, it shares some of the advantages of the TWSBI Eco in that it's got a very large ink capacity. It has a converter in this case with a plunger mechanism, which is really good. I can see how much ink is in there. All of that's really, really great. But this pen is a little bit more versatile than the TWSBI in that the converter comes out. I can use cartridges if I want. And look, it's good to be able to use cartridges sometimes if you're traveling. But the good thing with the cartridges for the Noodlers Ahab is that they are refillable. So you can order a package of empty cartridges, fill them with your favorite bottled ink. They come with a little screw top. And then when you're done with them, you can clean them out, refill them again, reuse them. So it's obviously the more environmentally friendly, greener option. You save money. And then, look, cartridges come in usually a limited range of colors. If you have reusable cartridges that you can fill with bottled ink, the range of colors opens up tremendously. And look, one of the main reasons why you might want to use a fountain pen is for the range of colors that are available. There are all kinds of inks. There are inks that shimmer. They've got little metallic particles in it. There are what are called shading inks that have a different color when they're more concentrated, when there's more ink pulled up, and a slightly different color when it's lighter. We'll talk about different qualities of ink in maybe another tutorial. There's a huge range out there. So having having cartridges having cartridges that are refillable is a huge advantage. The other huge advantage is that I can get rid of the cartridges, I can get rid of the converter, and do something called eye-dropping. Anytime you have a pen with a solid back like this, it means that you can take an eyedropper and fill the entire thing all the way up. Look, provided that this part is entirely plastic without any metal pieces that'll rust. Ink can corrode any kind of metal. So having a plastic back is one of the requirements. I can fill up the entire back here and then screw it in, and I have a giant ink reservoir here that'll last me, I don't know, depends how much you draw, months, possibly. Now, it does require 2 additional pieces of gear to set this up, both relatively cheap. You need a little rubber band, a little rubber ring to keep the pen from leaking, so you put it here. And then you probably also need silicone grease here on the threads, also to prevent any kind of leakage. But all those 2 supplies are readily available at any hardware store. You can also order them online. The one disadvantage of eye dropping is that sometimes the ink will burp, which happens when your hand warms up the air inside the reservoir, and as the air gets pushed out, it also pushes out ink, which can be a little bit of a problem. But you know, I haven't had so many issues with burping with most of my pens. I'm a little bit careful. Usually before I start writing, I give the pen a good shake, and that usually resolves any kind of burping problems. Back to some additional advantages. This pen is completely disassemblable, which is really good. The feed and the nib pull out, which makes the pen really easy to clean. This converter is a little bit of a pain in the butt to clean, however, particularly this little piston. That really needs to be fixed. This piston needs to be solid. There's no reason why there needs to be a hole there that gets stuck with ink. But the fact that this pulls out, and the fact that this is a number 6 nib, allows me to replace it with lots of other nib options. Number 6 is a nib size that is really common with other manufacturers. So Jowo makes number 6 nibs, which are excellent. You can buy for, I don't know, I forget how much. I'm going to say like maybe $15 to $20 will get you a really nice German nib that works really well in here. You can pop it in. This Conrad also takes a number 6 nib, exactly as the Ahab, and I have it fitted with a dip nib, specifically the Zebra G. This is a really nice, really popular dip nib with really fine line quality and excellent line variation. That's really hard to achieve with most fountain pen nibs. Excellent for calligraphy. Not that I do calligraphy, but really good for drawing. You can do the same thing with the Ahab as I did here with the Conrad. Again, there are tutorials online that will show you how to do this better than I can. I'll link to them. This nib that I have inside here is actually not the original Noodler's nib. Again, there's so many options, I couldn't resist. There's a company called Fountain Pen Revolution. They sell fountain pen nibs from India. They're really excellent, really good quality. This is their number 6 Ultra Flex nib. The usual nibs don't have the shoulders cut out like this, and they're really good. But when you cut out the shoulders, it makes the nib more flexible. And the reason why I have this nib in there is because it gives me absolutely tremendous, wonderful line variation. Really expressive lines, which, you know, depending on your style, is something that you might be looking for. Particularly if you're used to working with dip pens, which are usually really flexible, and you've been staying away from fountain pens because the nibs are kind of stiff and lifeless. Now you don't have an excuse. This is a relatively cheap pen. This is also about maybe $25, $30. The nib, okay, the nib is a little bit expensive. It's about $17. But look, for under $50, you can get yourself a really high quality, really reliable, flexible nib. I know it's much more expensive than a dip nib, by far. And really nothing will replace the dip nib for its performance, ease of cleaning, its cheapness. But this is pretty good. Now, the main advantage, as I see it, of this pen is that it's a really good learner's pen. This will teach you about how to tinker with your fountain pen, because when you first get this thing, quite often it doesn't write particularly well. Why? Because you'll find after a couple of tutorials that the nib needs to be aligned perfectly with the feed. So it has to be in a certain place. That'll teach you to get that alignment, to find exactly that spot. It'll teach you to do something called heat setting. So this feed is different from the plastic feeds in either the TWSBI or the Metropolitan. It's made of vulcanized rubber. Now this is a traditional material for making feeds, but it requires a little bit of adjustment, and that adjustment is called heat setting, which means that I dip this ebonite feed into really hot water, soften it a little bit, and then press it really hard against the nib and heat set it so that it fits better. There's a better fit between the feed and the nib. So this teaches you how to adjust your nibs. The nibs themselves are cheap enough that you can adjust the flow. These are things that can be a little bit dangerous with more expensive nibs. So this is a really good pen to mess around with, to break. I've actually broken some nibs by trying to regrind them. What else? I've carved deeper grooves in the feed to get a little bit more ink capacity, not ink capacity, more ink flow. So this is a really good pen to learn with. Not the smoothest writer, it sometimes leaks a little bit, but if you're looking to get serious about fountain pens, to learn about fountain pens, I think this is a really good gateway pen to learn with. And look, it is really, really sturdy. It'll last you a long time. I can run over this pen. I've had this for a really long time, and I've had no problems with it. So this is the Noodlers Ahab. Strongly recommended for anybody who wants to go a little bit deeper into the fountain pen world and really learn about how fountain pens work. So those are my 3 recommendations, kind of a generic recommendation. If I was going to buy any one pen, I would start with my TWSBI Eco, and then a good tinkerer's pen, a good pen for people that want to go deeper and learn about fountain pens. 3 options. I would collect all 3, really. I still use them. I use these 2 a lot. This one, you know, it's a good pen. I'm going to keep it. But these 2 are more strongly recommended than this one, I would say.